There is no way. It has been like 9, maybe 10 months since the most recent StarCraft 2 balance patch. Okay, so this just went live a few minutes ago? I'm in the middle of Silksong, but I guess Silksong can wait. Let's have a look. So, StarCraft 2 5.0.15 PTR patch notes. Okay, so let's talk about StarCraft 2's biggest problems. Overall, I think the game is actually pretty darn good. But of course, it is a complex video game, right? And therefore, I mean, you can never really get perfect balance. But it is nice to get continuous updates to keep things fresh and to keep things interesting. So I would say there's a bunch of problems. First off, Protoss versus Terran. Protoss versus Terran is probably the matchup where people complain the most. Terrans, in general, are experiencing a pretty hard time right now. Mostly because of the fact that energy overcharge gives the High Templar Storm immediately. And a lot of the Terran timing attacks are pretty much impossible to pull off. Terrans also kind of fall behind a bunch in the mid-game. They don't really have any easy map control if Protoss decides to go for like the mastic spend strategies. And then obviously in the early game, if you do the like Stalker into Sentry or Sentry first into Stalker or Stalker into Sentry, you can hallucinate a Phoenix continuously and basically get permanent vision all over the map. I think that's a little bit unfortunate and just not a great idea. It's honestly, I think energy recharge is a good ability. I haven't seen any of the actual changes, right? So anyways, I think energy recharge is a cool ability. Much more interesting than the shield battery overcharge, but it may have to be tuned down a tad. Secondly, Zerg versus Terran. We have the Cyclone bug. It's kind of bad. It is something that should have been fixed a long time ago. And I'm assuming they'll address it here, but let's have a look. So, actually, I'm not going to spoil myself too much. Couple of small changes for Zerg. Spire cost reduced from 250-200 to 150-150. The Spire is 200-200. Am I absolutely losing my mind? The Spire is not 250 minerals. Yeah. All right. This is the quality work that we have come to expect from... Aspire is 200 minerals, 200 gas. Man. All right. Spire cost reduced from 250-200, which is inaccurate, to 150-150. I've been suggesting this for a while. I think it's actually a great idea just to encourage Muta play a little bit more. Spires also take a very long time to get going. Like, they're just very slow to build. So I think this is a reasonable change. I think 200 to 150 would be okay too. It's mostly the gas that's the bottleneck. So I think 150, 150 might be a little much, but 200, 150 would be reasonable. Centrifugal hooks now gives a plus 5 HP bonus to Banelings again. They removed this a while ago, and Banelings kind of became a niche unit. The main problem with Banelings is that they're too cost inefficient if the opponent is good at the game. So only if the opponent is good at the game, right, is when it becomes a problem. I think this is reasonable, especially at the pro level. To clarify, they were like this for the vast majority of StarCraft 2's existence, at least like over the last long time. And then they removed it without really any buff to compensate. So I think giving it back is reasonable. Nothing all too crazy. Microbial Shroud now reduces ranged attacks by 50%. Whoa. Microbial Shroud. Okay, let's think about the implications for just a second. Microbial Shroud is the ability that replaced the Infested Terran on the Infestor, right? It's the ability that is by far the worst in all of StarCraft 2 right now, but it has some very niche use cases where it looks kind of insane. Microbial Shroud currently reduces the damage that you take from flying units by 50%. The main problem, of course, why you don't really see it much is that it's also the perfect, like, okay, just storm them to death kind of thing. Because the real Zerg anti-air is not coming from the Hydra or the Queen, but from the Corruptor. So the Corruptors are the real anti-air, and since Microbial Shroud is a ground-based ability, it doesn't really change anything. Microbial Shroud reduces ranged attacks by 50%. So where is this useful? This would be insanely useful during timing attacks. You could do a Roach Infestor timing attack. You could do a Hydra Infestor timing attack. You could do this against Stalker-based openers. You could do this against Marine-based openers, Siege Tank-based openers. Cyclones probably still have their lock-on, which isn't considered to be that's considered to be like straight-up spell damage, so that should still be at the full damage point. But this is a massive, like, it may actually go from like the worst ability to the best ability. Microbial Shroud effect no longer persists for a few seconds after the unit has left the Shroud. Okay, so this is the most recent way in which they tried to buff up the ability. It's basically like Dark... what's it called? Dark Swarm? Is this... I mean, it's a slightly less powerful Dark Swarm. Yeah. It basically makes it like the Brood War ability Dark Swarm, which is considered kind of busted. Although, obviously, Dark Swarm and Defilers, I mean, they're very different, right? But it lasts forever. The circle is massive. This is now, in my mind, kind of like one of those, why wouldn't you get 2 Infestors? Just get 2 Infestors every time you get up to an Infestation Pit, because it seems like a no-brainer. The fact that it doesn't stick to units, though, and the circle is obviously quite small, may make it fine. But obviously, Infestors are still good with fungal growth as well. I would not have thought that they would go an experimental change like this, because Blizzard hasn't been particularly reactive over the last few years. The few times that we have seen some of this stuff come into play, oftentimes they're not really quick to hotfix anything. Like, if something like this turns out to be utterly broken, and obviously right now it's PTR, right? So public test server. But if something like this turns out to be utterly broken, how long does it take for Blizzard to go back and, like, adjust stuff? That's, like, always something that is in my head. But anyways, Protoss. Energy Overcharge Grant has been reduced from 100 energy to 50 energy. Energy Overcharge cooldown reduced. Okay. So this is a big nerf. Huge nerf. Huge nerf. Whoa! What? Okay, hold up. Let's start from the top. Energy Overcharge Grant. So, Energy Overcharge, currently a 1-minute cooldown. It's on the Nexus. It currently gives 100 energy. Now it's going to give 50 energy instead. In order to compensate, they have made it so that the cooldown is reduced from 60 to 45 seconds, but this has 2 implications. First off, obviously, you get less energy in total per, like, 3 minutes that go by, right, if you want to be on top of it. And secondly, you would have to spend twice as much, or not quite twice as much, but you'd have to spend significantly more energy. Meaning that you would have to cut into your Chrono Boost production quite a lot. I think it would be okay if they reduced the damage, the damage from 100 to 50, and then changed the cooldown from 60 to 30. That way you could still get away with the same stuff, but it would cost you twice as much Nexus energy. In a way, this is a bit of a double nerf, which I'm a little bit... Alright. Mothership HP reduced from 350 to 300. Mostly going to make Hydralisks more reasonable. So Hydras with Microbial Shroud could actually do okay. I think this one is fair. This one, though, kind of had me for just a second. So the Psy Storm duration increased from 2.86 to 8.58. Meaning that Psy Storm lasts like 3 times as long. However, the Psy Storm damage has been reduced from 100 to 5 damage. This is basically forever, yes. Significantly less damage per second, so damage per second has been halved. But the duration has been tripled. So you could probably come in, throw Psy Storm, onto a sieged up tank, and the tank will slowly die. But it'll be far less effective against bio, especially like Marine Marauder-based unit compositions. Yeah, it becomes more of a zoning ability than a bam, you're dead kind of ability. Dark Templar blink attack delay reduced from 0.75 to 0.25. I think this is stupid. They should just remove the attack delay altogether. But whatever, I guess this is like a middle ground. So remember how back in the day when you had the Dark Templar blink ability, you could blink onto a planetary fortress and then it insta-killed the blink? I kind of liked it. But then they introduced a 0.75 second delay on it. So now the Dark Templar blink in, they're like, huh, where are we? Huh? And then the 0.75 seconds is over and they start slicing. That duration right now has been reduced. Fair enough. Surveillance mode now reveals the observer. Why? Surveillance mode increases vision from 13.75 to 15. Surveillance mode is the mode where you put your observers stationary, but they give you a 10% additional vision radius or so. Increasing it to 15 is a very significant surface area increase. I think this is an anti-F2 type of thing. So Protoss players for donkeys now are being accused of being all army hotkeyers. Now, obviously, Zergs and Terrans are likewise all army hotkey enjoyers. But it's more obvious for Protoss. And I guess this basically makes it punishable if you put it in surveillance mode, but okay. Okay, let's have a look at the Terran changes too before I give you my final thoughts here. Siege tank can no longer be abducted when in siege mode. Okay. Sure. Another Viper nerf. Viking cost reduced. Oof, that's a big Viking cost reduction. 25 minerals and 25 gas less each. Now, I'm not a Terran versus Protoss expert. I mean, maybe I am. Anyways, this is, like, if you need to know, like, the exact ins and outs, I'm guessing the pro gamers will give you more of a idea about it. But this sounds like it would make certain units, like, for example, Skytals, which is already not super common against Terran. I mean, you see it from time to time, but this is a big buff to Vikings, and I'm not sure if I like it. Drilling Claw's effectiveness increased from 1.07 to 0.71. Okay, so Drilling Claws is faster. That would help out Protoss a bunch in the mid-game, I suppose. Fair enough. And Hyperspeed rotors, or Hyperspeed rotors, which is an upgrade we've been seeing a ton as of late, is reduced. So currently, I think it's like 100 It's called Hyper Flight rotors, by the way. Dude, who wrote this post? It is called Hyper Flight rotors. I went to Castor School. Yeah, the ability is called Hyper Flight rotors, not Hyper Speed rotors. And it's now 100 seconds. So it's being reduced to a bunch of other upgrades. I like this. I think this is really reasonable. I love the idea of having speedy benchies going around. Not a bad idea. Okay, bug fixes. Fixed an issue with the Cyclone attack upgrade. Upgrade giving you +1 instead of +2. Yes, this is a less discussed issue with the Cyclone. This right over here is the big one. But the Cyclones indeed did not get as many damage points increased for every attack upgrade you got for Terran mech. So this is a buff for the Cyclone. This is a nerf for the Cyclone and fixes the lock-on problem that's been quite prevalent lately. Fix an issue with the mothership attack at max range. Yep. Fix an issue with orbital commands not auto-rallying. I'm not familiar with that one, but I have heard of this. a problem where sometimes the mothership would be a little bit too finicky. Okay. So, very curious. I like this a lot. Spiracles reduced, I think, is very reasonable. I like this a lot. I think this is also very reasonable, although could be too strong, who knows. This one is very experimental. These two right here obviously are together. This one is very experimental, and I wonder if it's too powerful. Energy overcharge. I wonder if this is too big of a nerf. It's probably fine, but it's definitely a nerf for energy overcharge. I think this one is reasonable. The psionic storm changes are odd. Like, Psi Storm lasting 3 times as long, but dealing half damage per tick? I guess I like it. Because if Protoss, like currently Protoss has a I delete this button already with the Disruptor, and Psi Storm is, I guess, just a little bit too oppressive. But keep in mind that Psi Storm is already changed with this ability right over here. Although, obviously, you will still be able to get the Storm out really quickly with an energy overcharge like this. So you can still get the Storms out. You can technically get them on multiple High Templar more quickly. So I have to see how that plays out. But now the Storm isn't so much a, I delete this, so you didn't pay attention and now you have to leave the game. Which I think, honestly, we should probably have less of in StarCraft 2, but it kind of feels funny to do this in the same breath as you upgrade Banelings. But I guess Banelings are literally very explosive, whereas the energy for the Psi Storm is obviously something that regens. Psi Storm damage reduced from 10 to 50, or to 5 per tick, yeah. This one is okay. This one I don't think is necessary. Maybe it's necessary. 15 range is a lot of range. When you see the vision changes, so obviously this is a vision change, right? So it's a radius, right? So 13.75 to 15 doesn't sound like a big change, but it does actually have, like, you know, it's significantly more. You're gonna have to be more specific, I guess, with where you park your observer. It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot of additional surface area. We'd have to calculate it using pi. We don't want to do that. We don't want to be nerds. I'm not Isaac Newton. I don't care about pi. I like to eat it. Okay. Siege tank can no longer be abducted when in siege mode. Yeah, whatever. Did anybody complain about this? I mean, obviously, when the mothership was no longer abductable, that is something people complained about for a long time. I don't know how it goes in the Balance Council, right? But I oftentimes kind of feel like there is a lot of the you get this, so I get this type of discussion. So, for example, I can imagine somebody in the group chat was like, yo, you're changing the way that, like, Microbial Shroud is now more powerful. Therefore, I should get a buff as well to compensate. And this one is whatever for me. This one, however, has me a little bit concerned. The Viking cost reduction, 25 minerals and 25 gas less. Not very applicable in the early to mid game. But later on, it does make a big difference. Maybe because of this Psi Storm change, Protoss will feel compelled to open Colossi a lot more frequently again. And in that particular instance, if Terran needs to make like 8, 12, I don't know, Vikings or so, obviously the Vikings are going to be substantially cheaper now, whereas the Colossus is not going to be any better. So, you know, you need to, like, consider the different implications, and this could be a kind of an issue. Yeah, you can still get the High Templar with energy out very rapidly, though. So you can technically get more Templar with energy ready for storms, just not with multiples ready with storms. But the storm might not be as useful anymore. This is interesting. I don't know how to think about it. I've never really heard anybody consider this or, like, suggest this as a change. But making storm more of, like, a zoning tool does not seem like a bad idea to me. This change I do like. This change I also do like. Drilling class effectiveness probably will help out a lot with Zerg with Protoss versus Terran mid-game. I know a lot of people kind of hate the idea of a Widowmine buff, but I think it's reasonable because Protoss really is too oppressive in Protoss versus Terran mid-game. Terran just can't really grab a lot of terrain. And likewise, obviously, this will also be very useful against the +5 HP for Banelings in Zerg versus Terran. So I think these will work against each other quite nicely. Very curious. I kind of love it, though. I think across the board, these are excellent changes. Obviously, the list is relatively small. I wonder if this is an overbuff for Zerg. I wonder if this is an over-nerf for Protoss. And I wonder if Terran is just getting away with only buffs. Actually, Terran's getting away with only buffs. Yeah, these are all buffs. Terran moment. Everybody has to, like, take a little bit of power, deliver a little bit of power. Take a little bit... But no, Terran gets straight up buffs. I think Zerg will probably have... Like, this is obviously a buff, right? This is obviously a buff. This is a nerf, but it's really not that big of a nerf. And this is also a huge buff. So it's buff, 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 nerf. Buff, 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 buff. Nerf. Nerf. Whatever, I can't tell you. Buff. Nerf. Then again, okay, if we look at the current Aligulac rankings, and I do have to warn you guys, this is going to be a bright website. Light mode activated, I'm sorry. If we look at the current balance report, there it is. This kind of may paint you the full picture a little bit better. So this is taking into account the games played at the tournament level. So Protoss versus Zerg, apparently in the month of August, there were 475 games of Protoss versus Zerg played in tournaments, and Protoss won 63.3% of them. Terran versus Zerg. Terran won 61% of all the Terran games played against Zerg. Protoss versus Terran. Protoss won 54.5% of all the games played against Terran. Now, you gotta obviously take these stats, especially the Zerg ones, with a grain of salt, because this is taking into consideration that the rank 50 Zerg in the world is at the same level as somebody like Serral, because Serral doesn't really play in a lot of tournaments. So in absolute numbers, I think you can probably draw more of a conclusion from the Protoss versus Terran line than you can from the Protoss versus Zerg and the Terran versus Zerg line, just because the very best Zergs don't play in as many events compared to the very best Terrans and the very best Protosses. So you got to take this with a grain of salt. But across the board, it definitely is indicative of Protoss being a little bit too strong, Terran maybe being a little bit too strong against Zerg, and Zerg currently getting the short end of the stick. The problem is, right, whenever we discuss balance, it's always difficult to do so, because, yeah, everybody has a plan, and then Serral wins the World Championships. Like, the signs have been pointing to Zerg being underpowered now for the majority of the year, and Serral wins the World Cup anyway. So, how do you... I don't know. It's a statistical outlier. If it wasn't for Serral, I think the numbers would have looked pretty jaded. But if you look at the current top 10, right? So we have 1 Zerg, 2 Zerg, 3 Zerg, 1 Terran, 2 Terran, 3 Terran, 4 Terran, 3 Protoss. Obviously, again, these numbers have to be taken with a grain of salt. Statistics don't really give you the full picture. There is certainly such a thing as statistical outliers, where some guys are just ridiculously good and also just capable of adjusting their current feelings about the game. But I think across the board, right, balance is currently pretty good. So according to this, the leading race is actually Terran and the lagging race is Zerg. I find that a little ironic. I don't think that's entirely true. I think the leading race is probably Protoss by a few percentage points. Zerg is probably slightly lagging. But yeah, I think actually these changes over here are a step in the right direction. Now, obviously, what always makes this difficult, right? So the last few times that we did get balance updates to StarCraft 2, we also got new maps. And new maps have a very significant impact on the balance of the game. So how do you know that the game is now properly balanced if we're also changing the maps immediately? Now, I think it's exciting. I'm hoping we're going to get new maps as well. So usually the way that this goes is they're going to be on the PTR. And I think what the guy over at the Blizzard offices does is he's just sort of monitoring the situation from a distance. And unless there is a ridiculous amount of outcry, in about 2-3 weeks or so, these patch notes will probably go live onto the ladder just as they are. Rarely do we actually get the PTR, so the public test server, and then follow up adjustments. At least over the last few years, whenever there is a PTR, these changes will just go straight onto the ladder, and this is what we're going to have to deal with. Now, I'm not saying that that is the case again this time around, but Blizzard hasn't been particularly communicative. So I think it's fair to say that a lot of this is going to change. By the way, the Terran changes over here. Yes, all of these are buffs. This over here, though, is definitely a set of nerfs. This especially is a big nerf to the Cyclone. Because currently, obviously, Cyclones are bugged, and they have been bugged for 9 months now. But at some point, when there is a bug in the game, it kind of becomes canon, right? When a unit is overpowered and not adjusted because of a bug for a long time. Maybe it's actually okay. It's not a nerf, it's to fix an error, but it was in the game for like 10 months. And exactly, last year, they identified a Brute Lord bug. And they messed around with it and figured out the fix for the Brute Lord bug. But then, because the Brute Lord turned out to be good, they reverted the bug fix for the Brute Lord. Which I found still one of the funniest things I've read on the Battle.net website, where they reverted a bug fix. I know there's a lot of software developers that like watching my content, and you just it kind of hurts. Reverting a bug fix, because otherwise you would have to do more work. Ugh. What an insane concept. No, but across the board, I think this is really good. Now, one more thing that I would like to go ahead and do is just have a look at the /r/StarCraft subreddit. Absolutely lose their minds. 20 minutes ago is when this was posted. Is anybody already freaking out? Real changes? Do I agree with them? But I like real changes. Is this real? I don't like changes, but hooray for getting patches. Once again, proving how clueless the Balance Council is. The unpaid intern snuck into the Blizzard HQ. Go, intern, go. Are these changes real? I don't see a Brute Lord buff. As a Protoss, I understand the energy charge changes. The other changes for them, blah, blah, blah. I think the rest are also a lot to swallow. Look, a lot of these changes are going to be relevant for the pro level only. I know I say this every time there are balance changes, but for the vast majority of the StarCraft 2 player base, you probably wouldn't even notice the difference. That includes myself. A lot of these changes are specifically made for the pro level, right? And that's always the question, like, how do you balance the game at every level? You don't. You have to choose. You can't balance for every level. It's just not, like, realistic. So, yeah, the Storm change, exactly. Like, the Storm change is a big one at all levels. This is going to make it a lot less lethal. Like, this reduces the unit lethality on the ladder for everybody. This one is not very relevant for most people. This one is relevant, of course, but not that big of a deal. This one, it's one of those changes where I feel like if you wouldn't have mentioned it and you just changed the values, it would take like a year for people to find out that it's even a thing. Surveillance mode, I guess, is relevant. But it's all relatively minor. Like, none of these are really going to break the game for the majority of players out there. I am feeling a little bad, though, for all of the Cyclone enjoyers on the ladder right now. I have gotten many DMs over the last half year or so of Zerg players that do not know how to play against Terran. Apparently, there's a lot of Terran players that have inflated their MMR a little bit by just rushing Cyclones against every Zerg. They're gonna have to relearn how to play TVZ, I'm afraid. But other than that, I think this is a good list. Yeah. I don't think it's bad at all. I like this. I'm excited to see some games.